and welcome to June's Bookorama. I'm June Thomas. Of the 6 places that my book, A Place of Our Own, 6 Spaces That Shaped Queer Women's Culture, celebrates, the one that I've got the least personal connection with and experience of is the softball diamond. I'm kind of an indoors person, and I didn't grow up with the sport. But over the course of my research, I realized that the softball diamond is an amazingly fruitful place for organizing and blowing off steam. In A Place of Our Own, I talk about several historical moments where softball became a political arena because lesbian feminists used rec league sports as a way to recruit apolitical women into organizations and give people a place to gather that wasn't a boozy bar or a cerebral bookstore, a place to be outside in the sun with friends, some of whom you might only have met that day. One of the stories I tell is that of the Alpha Omegas and the other softball teams fielded by Alpha, the Atlanta Lesbian-Feminist Alliance. Alpha was founded by politically active women, socialist feminists, women who traveled to Cuba to work with the Venceremos Brigade, Northerners who moved to the South to do civil rights work, and it was a very active organization. Members showed up at ERA rallies and protested when the Atlanta Journal-Constitution refused to list Alpha events alongside other local meetings. They organized a super ambitious regional gathering, 1975's Southeast Lesbian Conference, and they offered themselves as representatives of homosexuality in college classes. They also started a softball team. Looking at issues of the Alpha newsletter from back in 1974, it seems that the beginnings of what became known as the organization's softball strategy were pretty casual. A small notice said, "Some of us want to get together and join other teams so we can play regularly in the Atlanta Recreation League. You don't have to be a jock or even experienced in order to play." Later that year, a team named the Alpha Omegas took to the field, and they made a couple of discoveries right away. The first was how great it felt to play. Vicky Gabrina, who had been part of the radical Weather Underground movement just a few years before, wrote that, "After 32 years of thinking of myself as a non-athlete, I discovered that I could hit the ball, I could catch, I could run, and I could throw. For me, that was incredible, seemingly beyond reach only a short while before." Gabrina gushed about the, quote, "spirit that came out of genuinely enjoying each other, our bodies, and developing our Amazon prowess." But softball wasn't just a way to build strong bodies and decompress from the stress of political organizing. It also provided a solution to one of the biggest challenges the lesbian feminist movement faced in creating new institutions and building a power base: the need to recruit and radicalize women who weren't yet engaged in lesbian politics. Softball made a new kind of outreach possible. Alpha squads were lesbian feminism made flesh. The presence on the field introduced closeted lesbians on other teams and even civilians in the stands to a new kind of woman. After the first season of softball, Alpha membership grew from 30 to 100. I think the spirit of that time is beautifully expressed in the queer cheers the Alpha women took to the public parks of Atlanta and eventually all around South Georgia. Let me share a couple of examples. Alpha women would yell, "2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits a dollar, all for the queers, stand up and holler." And "Give me an A, give me an L, give me an F, give me an A, what do you got? Dykes, dykes, dykes." Now, I don't want to oversimplify the way that softball changed Alpha. It wasn't entirely positive that some members spent many hours of each week playing or watching softball rather than doing direct political organizing. And there's more about that story in my book. I also share the story of Gente, a Bay Area softball team organized by and composed of lesbians of color. In the early 1970s, Gente joined 9 bar-sponsored teams in the Bay Area Women's Softball League. And a decade after Gente dissolved, poet Pat Parker, who had been active in Gente, provided more background on why the team was formed. She told Yvonne Zipta, the author of the book Diamonds Are a Dyke's Best Friend, that while she was playing in a bar league-sponsored basketball game, a white woman on her team had used a racial slur against a member of a rival team. Parker said, "Now that didn't make me feel good. And of course, it didn't make the woman on the other team feel okay either." They met afterward and discussed what to do. Parker said, "Here we are, playing our hearts out with these people, and we can't be sure of them." Gente was their solution, and for Gente players, standing side by side on the softball field was a blatant statement, a consciousness-raising thing. Forming their own queer team solved some problems and created others. Several Gente members who had previously played on City League or Industrial League softball teams reported having experienced issues with straight women feeling intimidated by out lesbian teammates. At the same time, playing on a lesbian team meant affiliating themselves with queer bars, which could promote friendship and bonding, but also involved women of color putting their money into the pockets of white bar owners who didn't always make them feel welcome. After all, the bars didn't support softball teams out of altruism, but to make a profit. Hosting softball teams put money into the bar's tills. And as a Gente player told Lesbian Tide in 1974, "It's not just the team that goes to a bar. It's us and our lovers and our friends and people who just want something to do on Sunday afternoon after the games. It's a nice way for the bars to attract people." Softball provided the Gente community with structure and sociability. Even women who weren't able to play or weren't interested in playing could consult a league schedule to learn when and where they could find other politically conscious lesbians of color in a healthy outdoor setting. Sports gave people something to cheer for, and it felt good to the players to hear those cheers. One thing that really struck me in the course of my research is that while the number of lesbian bars and feminist bookstores has shrunk dramatically in the last few decades, softball endures. Today, there are leagues all over the country. And as one woman who is active in the Big Apple Softball League, which is New York's LGBTQ softball league, told me, "It's a great queer hang." So why has softball escaped the problems that have affected most other lesbian spaces? Well, unlike most of the places where lesbians have traditionally gone to find one another, on the field there are no business imperatives at play. Sure, leagues typically require players to pay a small fee that's intended to cover expenses like field rental and umpires, but otherwise there's no pressure to fit what you might call the square peg of lesbian culture into the round hole of for-profit capitalism. Softball also seems to have escaped the attention of cis-het men. While lesbian bar owners had to strategize and scheme to keep cisgender men out of their clubs, softball's butch aesthetics, coupled perhaps with its lack of concealment, kept gawkers away. I'm also reliably informed that playing softball is fun. Before I go, I want to note that while softball is the default lesbian sport in North America, though every time I say that, I hear from rugby players, every country has its own equivalent. I've heard from friends in other countries that where they live, it's field hockey, and in many places, maybe even in most places in the world, it's soccer. So while these stories from lesbian history concern softball, I'm sure there are lots of similar stories out there in the world about other sports. I'd love to hear about your experiences with queer softball or any other sport. Please share them in the comments below. And if you have any questions whatsoever about my book, A Place of Our Own, 6 Spaces That Shaped Queer Women's Culture, the comments are also a great place to ask them. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.